Between 1939 and 1950, America was at war, then recovering from war, and country music was one of the few things that told the truth about both.
You are my sunshine.
These songs played on radios in living rooms, on jukeboxes and honky tonks, and on armed forces broadcasts in the Pacific and in Europe. Some of them were about the men who left, some were about the women who stayed, some were about coming home and finding that home had changed.
Like you never been held.
These are 20 country songs released during the World War II era that helped an entire generation hold on.
No.
Number 20. There's a Star-Spangled Banner Waving Somewhere. Elton, Britt, 1942.
There's a star-spangled banner waving.
Paul Roberts was a young man in his early 20s when he wrote this song with the war raging around him and went to New York looking for a publisher. Bob Miller heard it immediately as a hit, published it under a pen name, and handed it to Elton Britt, a yodeler from Searcy County, Arkansas, who had been billed since his teenage years as the world's highest yodeler. Britt recorded it in March 1942. The record sold out in music stores as fast as pressing plants could produce it, which was itself slowed down because shellac, the main material for 78 RPM records, was being rationed for the war effort.
Waving o'er the land of heroes brave.
The song is about a young disabled man who cannot serve in the military and yearns for a place in the heaven reserved for those who die in battle. It sold over 4 million copies and became the first country music record in history to receive a gold record. President Franklin Roosevelt heard it, was moved by it, and personally invited Britt to perform it at the White House. That invitation from a sitting president, for a hillbilly yodeler from Arkansas, is the measure of what this record meant to the country in 1942.
Country fair and our sweet liberty.
Britt performed on USO tours overseas and for the British royal family. He later ran briefly for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1960 as a publicity stunt. None of it came close to the moment of that song, a young disabled man's wish to earn a place beside the soldiers, played over and over on every major radio station in the country while the war was still very much in doubt.
By the mad dictators, leaders of corruption.
Number 19. Pistol Packin' Mama, Al Dexter, 1943.
Drinking beer in a cabaret, and was I having fun?
Al Dexter was running a honky-tonk bar in Turnertown, Texas, when a woman came in carrying a gun, chased her husband's girlfriend out of the bar and across a pasture and through a barbed wire fence, and gave Dexter the image he needed for the biggest song he would ever write. He recorded Pistol Packin' Mama in a Los Angeles studio in March 1942, using session musicians who normally worked for Gene Autry. Then he sat on it.
Until one night she caught me right, and now I'm on.
In 1942, the American Federation of Musicians went on strike against the record labels, shutting down almost all new commercial recording for over a year. Labels began scraping their vaults for unreleased material, and OK Records put out Dexter's track in March 1943, paired with another song called Rosalita. The jukeboxes, starved for new music, grabbed it. By October 30th, 1943, it had reached number 1 on the Billboard National Chart, the first country record to ever top the mainstream pop chart. It sold 3 million copies. Bing Crosby covered it with the Andrews Sisters, and NBC Radio banned his version because it contained the line, "Drinking beer in a cabaret." The line had to be changed to "Singing songs in a cabaret" before it could air. The original lyrics stayed in Dexter's version. He was not asked to change it. This was the first time country music had outsold everything else in America, and a honky-tonk barroom story with a gun-toting woman in it was the record that did it.
The blonde, until one night she shut out the lights.
Number 18. You Are My Sunshine, Jimmy Davis, 1940.
The other night.
The ownership of this song has been disputed since it was first recorded. Two musicians named Paul and Hoke Rice recorded it in 1939. A man named Oliver Hood recorded it the same year. Davis bought the rights to it in 1940 for what various accounts put between $35 and $60, recorded it on February 5th in New York City, and claimed co-authorship. He never convincingly explained who actually wrote it. He did not have to. The record sold over 1 million copies and made him famous enough to run for governor of Louisiana.
I was mistaken.
The song became comfort music across the country during the war years. Played by mothers to children, remembered by soldiers far from home, broadcast over armed forces radio to troops in the Pacific. Davis used it as his campaign theme when he won the Louisiana governorship in 1944 and again in 1960. It was named the official state song of Louisiana in 1977. It has been recorded in over 30 languages and covered by more than 350 artists, including Ray Charles, Johnny Cash, and Bing Crosby.
Please don't take my son.
Davis lived to be 101 years old, never stopped performing, and carried the song with him for more than 6 decades. Whatever the truth of its authorship, the version that played through the darkest years of the 20th century was his. The song became so connected to comfort and home that soldiers wrote about hearing it in letters back to their families. A $60 purchase may be the best investment in American music history. Number 17. Wreck on the Highway, Roy Acuff, 1942.
Who did you say it was, brother?
Roy Acuff did not write this song. It was written by Dorsey Dixon and recorded by him in 1938. But Acuff's 1942 recording was the one that reached the country at the exact moment it needed it most. The song describes a man who comes across a terrible car accident late at night and sits with a dying stranger while the rain falls, thinking about the brevity of life and the importance of those we love. It is a song about mortality in the plainest possible terms, with no resolution beyond the fact that it happened and nothing can be done. During the war, that plainness landed differently than it might have in peacetime. Acuff was already the most popular performer on the Grand Ole Opry and was known across the South through the WSM radio broadcast. The song became one of the most requested in his catalog, played by families sitting around radios who knew someone overseas and thought about loss in ways they could not always articulate. Japanese troops in the Pacific, according to reports that circulated widely at the time, were known to taunt American soldiers by shouting, "To hell with Roy Acuff," which indicated that his name had become synonymous with American morale itself. Acuff was offered a chance to run for governor of Tennessee twice. He declined both times. He remained the undisputed king of country music through the war years and beyond. And the wreck on the highway, that quiet, rain-soaked moment with a dying stranger, was one of the songs that held the country together.
Death laid her hand in destruction.
Number 16. Smoke on the Water, Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys, 1944.
There will be a sad day coming for the foes of all mankind.
This is not the same song as the Deep Purple rock classic. Red Foley wrote this, "Smoke on the Water" in 1944, as a warning about the dangers of war spreading across the world. The smoke on the water being a literal image of burning ships and a metaphorical image of the darkness moving across the oceans. Foley had a hit with it first, but Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys took it to #1 on the country chart later the same year.
They must answer to the people and its trouble.
Bob Wills had been building Western swing, his fusion of country, jazz, and blues, out of Tulsa radio since the early 1930s, and by 1944, he was one of the most popular band leaders in the country. His version of the song had the full swing band behind it, which gave a wartime message a danceable energy that Foley's recording had not quite achieved. People wanted to dance even when the subject was serious, maybe especially then.
Their mind, everybody who must fear them will
Wills served briefly in the Army in 1942 before receiving a medical discharge, and the war disrupted the regular touring schedule that his band depended on. He lost several musicians to the draft. He rebuilt the band multiple times and kept recording. Smoke on the Water reached audiences who were living with the reality of what the lyrics described, a world changed by what was burning on the water, and they danced to it anyway.
Smoke on the mountains where the heathen gods stay.
Number 15. Smoke, Smoke, Smoke. That Cigarette, Tex Williams, 1947.
I have a fellow man with a heart of gold with the ways of a gentleman, I've been told.
Merle Travis wrote the bulk of this song, and Tex Williams helped finish it. Travis had just come out of a stretch of wartime service and had watched men light cigarette after cigarette, before combat, after combat, during card games, during long waits, and decided someone needed to write the song that described the man who cannot get through a single conversation without stopping everything to smoke. Williams recorded it in his talking blues style at Radio Recorders in Hollywood in March 1947, and Capitol released it that July.
Nicotine flavors are all the same, at a pet party or a poker game, everything's got to stop.
It reached #1 on the Billboard Country Chart and stayed there for 16 non-consecutive weeks, one of the longest runs at #1 in the history of the chart to that point. It also crossed over to reach the pop top 5 nationally, making it one of the biggest country crossovers of the entire decade. The men who had spent the war years smoking through everything they could not control recognized the song immediately. The humor was the recognition. Every soldier and every woman who had watched a soldier light up knew exactly what Williams was describing.
Game of chance the other night, old Dame Fortune was doing me right, man. Kings and queens.
Travis went on to write 16 Tons for Tennessee Ernie Ford, which hit #1 in 1955. Williams continued performing well into the 1970s and remained one of the most distinctive voices in Western swing. The cigarette song that came out of the post-war years became one of the most played records on jukeboxes from California to Nashville. Which is appropriate. Jukebox operators know exactly what people want to hear after a long shift, and in 1947, they wanted to hear someone describe the man who will not put the cigarette down for anything.
She was oh so far from a chunk of ice. Our smooching party was going real.
Number 14. At Mail Call Today, Gene Autry, 1945.
At mail call today, dear.
Gene Autry enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces on July 26, 1942, live on his own radio program. He had spent the first 19 minutes of that 30-minute broadcast of Melody Ranch paying tribute to the American way of life and his willingness to fight, and then invited Colonel Edward Schaefer on air to swear him in as a technical sergeant in front of his entire listening audience. It was one of the most public enlistments of the war, a man telling his fans in real time that he was going. The War Department had requested it specifically for morale purposes. Autry went anyway, which is the part that mattered.
I can't understand love.
He served as a cargo pilot and flew the dangerous airlift route over the Himalayas between India and China, known as the Hump. When he returned in 1944, one of his first recordings was At Mail Call Today, co-written with Fred Rose, which tells the story of a soldier standing at mail call and opening a Dear John letter. The girl he loved back home has left him. The final lines describe his despair with the plain finality of something that cannot be argued with. The song reached #1 on the country chart and stayed there for 8 weeks.
I've slept in the foxhole.
Autry had co-written the song while still in uniform, giving it an authenticity that no civilian songwriter could have provided. He understood what it meant to be far from home, waiting for word, and what it felt like when the word that arrived was not what you had hoped. He went on to record Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer in 1949 and became the only entertainer to receive 5 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, 1 each for radio, records, film, television, and live performance. At Mail Call Today was the sound of the uniform still on, the war still happening, and the truth still being told.
But always remember.
Number 13. Filipino Baby, Cowboy Copas, 1946.
When the warship left Manila, sailing proudly o'er.
The song traces back to an 1898 composition by Charles K. Harris, written during the Philippine Insurrection, later reworked by Bill Cox and Clark Van Ness in the late 1930s. By the time Cowboy Copas, Lloyd Estelle Copas from Adams County, Ohio, cut his version for King Records in 1944, the Philippines had become a theater of World War II. The original pressing quality was so poor that King Records owner Sid Nathan scrapped the run and built his own manufacturing plant, specifically so he could reissue it properly. That recut version hit the country chart in August 1946 and peaked at number 4.
Her teeth are bright and pearly, and her hair.
The timing gave the song a weight it had not carried in earlier versions. American troops had spent years in the Pacific, including in the Philippines, and a song about a soldier's love for a Filipino woman landed in 1946 as something that named an experience many men carried home but rarely spoke about. Copus delivered it with a voice smooth enough to make the sentiment feel honest rather than sentimental, which is exactly what the post-war audience needed from it. Copus went on to have several more country hits through the late 1940s and early 1950s, before his career faded mid-decade, then surged back in 1960 with his biggest hit, Alabama, which stayed at #1 for 3 months. He was killed in the March 1963 plane crash that also took Patsy Cline and Hawkshaw Hawkins. Filipino Baby was the record that first made his name, built on a song that had already traveled through 2 wars before he recorded it.
Then one day he whispered, darling,
Number 12. So Round, So Firm, So Fully Packed. Merle Travis, 1947.
So round, so firm, so fully packed. That's my...
Merle Travis was from Rosewood, Kentucky, the son of a coal miner, and by 1947 had developed a finger-picking guitar style so influential that it became known simply as Travis picking. He had also spent time in the Marines, where he picked up the phrase, so round, so firm, so fully packed, from a Lucky Strike cigarette advertisement. He turned it into a song about a woman, with the cigarette slogan repurposed as romantic description, delivered with a wink so broad it was practically visible through the radio.
You can bet your boots I'd walk a mile.
The song reached #1 on the country chart in 1947 and became a massive jukebox hit across the post-war South. The humor in it was the humor of men who had come back from somewhere difficult and needed to laugh at something ordinary. Travis wrote it quickly, recorded it cheaply, and did not expect it to dominate the charts. It did anyway, because the post-war audience was ready for something that was not about dying or waiting or grief, something that was just funny and alive.
Through the snow, just to see her toothbrush smile.
Travis was one of the most gifted musicians of the era. He later wrote 16 Tons, which Tennessee Ernie Ford took to #1 in 1955. He played guitar on some of the most important country records of the late 1940s. So Round, So Firm, So Fully Packed was the moment he stepped out from behind the session work and let people hear what the grin behind the guitar sounded like.
They mention on the radio, if you don't think.
Number 11. I'll Hold You in My Heart, Till I Can Hold You in My Arms. Eddie Arnold, 1947.
I'll hold you in my heart.
Eddie Arnold was the Tennessee plowboy, a smooth, radio-friendly voice from Henderson County, Tennessee, who had worked as a hand on a farm before finding his way into music. By 1947, he was already one of the most consistent presences on the country chart, and I'll Hold You in My Heart became one of the defining recordings of his early career. It spent 21 weeks at #1 on the country chart, which was a record at the time.
Till I can hold.
The song is a simple, direct promise from a man who is apart from the woman he loves, the holding in the heart as a placeholder for the physical reunion that is coming. Written in the immediate post-war period, it carried a double meaning that audiences understood without needing it explained. The men who had held their wives and sweethearts in their hearts for years while overseas heard this record and recognized what it was describing. The women who had done the same heard it too.
You in my arms, like you never.
Arnold went on to become one of the best-selling country artists of the 20th century, moving gradually from the honky-tonk sound of the 1940s toward a smoother, pop-influenced style that expanded his audience considerably. He sold over 85 million records over a career that stretched across 5 decades. I'll Hold You in My Heart was the record that started the run, a wartime promise delivered in a voice that made it sound like it was already halfway kept.
The night away.
10 songs left, and we are getting into the records that defined what America sounded like the moment the war ended. Before we get there, if you have not subscribed yet, do it now and hit the bell. This channel covers classic country history every week, and you will not hear about it any other way. 10 left. Let's keep going. Number 10. Slippin' Around, Margaret Whiting and Jimmy Wakely, 1949.
Seems we always have to slip.
Floyd Tillman wrote this song about infidelity, specifically about 2 people in relationships with other people who are conducting an affair in secret, slipping around because they cannot be seen together, and it was considered so controversial that some radio stations refused to play it. Margaret Whiting was a pop singer from Detroit. Jimmy Wakely was a country singer and film cowboy from Mineola, Arkansas. Their duet crossed both their audiences and reached #1 on both the pop and country charts simultaneously in 1949.
Have you near?
But we just have.
The post-war years had produced enormous social upheaval, including a dramatic rise in divorce rates, affairs, and the quiet dissolution of wartime marriages that had been made in haste or maintained across years of absence. Slippin' Around named what was happening in living rooms across the country without judging it. It simply described two people in a situation they could not entirely control and sang about it with the matter-of-fact honesty that country music at its best has always been capable of.
I'm so in love with you. I hope so.
The record stayed on the country chart for 23 weeks and sold over 1 million copies. Whiting had the more prominent pop career of the two, but the crossover achievement belonged to both of them equally. Floyd Tillman, who wrote it, received less attention than the performers, which is how it usually went. He understood what was happening after the war and wrote a song that said so plainly,
Someday I'll find a way to bring you back.
Number 9. Candy Kisses, George Morgan, 1949.
Candy kisses wrapped in.
George Morgan was 23 years old when he recorded Candy Kisses for Columbia Records, had never had a hit, and was not yet a member of the Grand Ole Opry. The song is a gentle, romantic ballad about the sweetness of a first love, candy kisses that meant more than gold, delivered in a voice so smooth and natural that it sounded like something being said rather than performed.
Old time, you don't mean it.
It reached #1 on the country chart and stayed there for several weeks, making Morgan an overnight success in the most literal sense. He was invited to join the Grand Ole Opry and became one of the most popular performers of the late 1940s. The post-war years had created an enormous appetite for sweetness, for music that was romantic and hopeful, rather than about loss or waiting or absence. Candy Kisses arrived at exactly that moment and gave the audience exactly what it needed.
Kisses wrapped in paper.
Morgan's career was overshadowed in later years by the fame of his daughter Lori Morgan, who became a major country star in the 1980s and 1990s. George Morgan died in 1975 at the age of 51. The song that started his career was one of the purest expressions of romantic optimism in post-war country music. A young man, a sweet memory, and a voice that made you believe in both.
Candy kisses.
Number 8. Lovesick Blues, Hank Williams, 1949. Hank Williams did not write this song. It was written by Cliff Friend and Irving Mills in 1922 for a Broadway musical called Oh, Ernest, and had been recorded several times before Williams heard a version by a fellow Alabamian named Rex Griffin and started performing it at dances across the Southeast. His record producer Fred Rose did not want to record it. Williams persuaded him. The session happened in December 1948, and the record came out in February 1949. Spent 16 weeks at #1 on the country chart. It changed everything that came after it. The Grand Ole Opry had been keeping Williams at arm's length because of his reputation for heavy drinking. But when Lovesick Blues became the biggest country record of the year, they could not ignore him any longer. He made his Opry debut on June 11, 1949, performing the song for an audience that called him back for 6 encores. The Opry hosts had to plead with the crowd to stop so the rest of the show could go on.
I've lost my heart, it seems.
Williams was dead inside 4 years, on January 1, 1953, at 29 years old. The yodel break in the middle of Lovesick Blues, borrowed from Emmett Miller's 1925 recording, was the sound that announced him. From that 6 encore night forward, he was the most important voice in country music. He held that position until the moment he died, and in many respects he still. Number 7. Jealous Heart, Tex Ritter, 1944.
Jealous heart, ooh, jealous heart.
Jenny Lou Carson wrote Jealous Heart and recorded it herself first, but it was Tex Ritter's version, cut on September 20th, 1944, at Capitol Records in Los Angeles, that reached the country audience at the moment it was ready to hear it. The song is about a jealous heart that drove away the one person it loved, told from the perspective of the man who realizes too late what his suspicion and possessiveness cost him. In 1944, with millions of men overseas and millions of women left behind, the suspicion ran in both directions. Soldiers wondering what was happening at home, women wondering what their men were doing across an ocean. The song named an anxiety that nobody was discussing openly. It spent 23 weeks on the country chart and peaked at number 2, which understates its presence. It was one of the most requested songs at live shows and one of the most played on jukeboxes throughout 1944 and into 1945. Ritter had become one of the first artists signed by the newly formed Capitol Records in 1942 after a decade of recording with little success elsewhere, and Jealous Heart was the record that confirmed Capitol had made the right call. He followed it with You Two-Timed Me One Time Too Often in 1945, which hit number 1 for 11 consecutive weeks, the wartime infidelity anxiety playing out across back-to-back chart records. Ritter went on to sing the title theme for the 1952 film High Noon, alongside Gary Cooper and Grace Kelly, which became his signature recording for a different generation. He was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 1964. His son John Ritter became one of the most beloved television comedians of the 1970s and 1980s. Jealous Heart was the record that built the foundation. A song about a suspicious heart, written by a woman, recorded by a singing cowboy, played on jukeboxes across a country that was doing its best not to think too hard about what separation does to people who love each other.
Why did I let you?
Number 6, Tennessee Waltz, Patti Page, 1950.
I was dancing with
Red Stewart and Pee Wee King wrote Tennessee Waltz in 1947 on the back of a matchbook while riding in a tour bus, inspired by Bill Monroe's Kentucky Waltz. Pee Wee King recorded it first and had a modest country hit. Patti Page recorded it in 1950 as a B-side to another song. The label expected nothing from it, and it sold over 10 million copies in less than a year.
the night they were playing.
Page used a then-novel technique of overdubbing her own voice to create a harmony with herself, the first major pop hit to use this method. And the combination of the production innovation and the elegance of the waltz melody produced something that crossed every format simultaneously. It reached number 1 on the pop chart and the country chart and the rhythm and blues chart at the same time, making it one of the most commercially successful recordings in American music history to that point.
The beautiful.
The song is about a couple dancing at a party, one partner losing the other to a friend who asks her to dance and takes her away. It is a song about loss disguised as a song about a dance. The Tennessee Waltz they shared, the memory of it, the ache of what came after. In 1950, 5 years after the end of the war, that emotional undertow was still very much present in American life. Page's voice over itself was the sound of a country still learning how to grieve what it had lost. Number 5, I'm Moving On, Hank Snow, 1950.
That big eight-wheeler rolling down the track means to loving daddy.
Hank Snow was born in Liverpool, Nova Scotia, Canada in 1914, was abandoned by his mother at 8 years old, and spent his childhood working on fishing boats and being beaten by a stepfather before teaching himself guitar from a mail-order course and starting to perform as Hank, the yodeling ranger. He had been trying to break into the American country market for over a decade before I'm Moving On finally arrived.
Daddy wrong.
He wrote the song himself, recorded it in 1950, and it reached number 1 on the country chart, where it stayed for 21 consecutive weeks, tying the record Eddie Arnold had set with I'll Hold You in My Heart. The song is about a man who has been wronged and is leaving without looking back, delivered with the finality of someone who has genuinely made up his mind. Snow's voice had the weathered authority of someone who had actually moved on from difficult things, who knew what that decision felt like from the inside. The post-war restlessness that drove so many Americans to leave the places they had grown up, chase opportunity in new cities, or simply start over, was the emotional current the song tapped. Snow became one of the longest-tenured members of the Grand Ole Opry. He performed there for 45 years. I'm Movin' On was the record that made all of it possible, written by a man who had spent his whole life moving on before he ever wrote a song about it.
And I'm moving on. Robert.
Number 4. Chattanooga Shoeshine Boy, Red Foley, 1950. Red Foley was from Blue Lick, Kentucky, and by 1950 was one of the biggest names in country music, hosting the Ozark Jubilee radio program and recording steadily for Decca. Chattanooga Shoeshine Boy was written by Harry Stone and Jack Stapp, two executives at WSM Nashville who wrote it after watching a shoeshine boy work his rag with such rhythm and energy that it looked like a performance. Foley recorded it in January 1950, and it crossed over immediately to the pop chart, reaching the top 5 nationally and becoming one of the biggest crossover hits of his career. The energy in the record, the snap and swing of the shoeshine boy's rag, was the sound of American optimism in the post-war years, the pride in ordinary work done with skill and joy. After a decade of war and grief and absence, a record that was simply happy about someone shining shoes with rhythm felt like a declaration. Foley had already demonstrated his range with patriotic wartime recordings and gospel material, and Chattanooga Shoeshine Boy showed yet another side, the pure joy of a groove. Between 1947 and 1954, he placed 43 records in the Billboard Top 10, a pace that has rarely been matched in country music history. The Shoeshine Boy, whoever he was on that Chattanooga corner, helped set that record in motion. Number 3. Why Don't You Haul Off and Love Me, Wayne Rainey, 1949.
They say a love bug will get you at the age.
Wayne Rainey was a harmonica player from Wolf Bayou, Arkansas, who had been working in radio and recording for King Records out of Cincinnati through the late 1940s. He co-wrote Why Don't You Haul Off and Love Me with Lonnie Glosson, recorded it in 1949, and had perhaps the least likely #1 hit of the post-war period, a novelty love song built around a harmonica riff and a proposition so direct it was almost comical, delivered in an Arkansas accent so thick it was practically percussion. It reached #1 on the country chart and stayed there, which surprised nearly everyone, including Rainey. The post-war period had created an appetite for music that was simple and unpretentious, music that had no interest in elegance and just said what it meant. Haul off and love me. That was the whole argument. The audience understood it immediately.
Haul off and love me one more time.
Rainey suffered from polio as a child and performed throughout his career with physical limitations that would have ended most careers before they started. He continued recording and performing in medicine shows and radio programs long after his chart success faded. Why Don't You Haul Off and Love Me was his one moment at the top, and it remains one of the more joyful and uncomplicated records that country music produced in the years after the war. A man with a harmonica and a direct question, asking it with everything he had. Number 2. Soldier's Last Letter, Ernest Tubb, 1944.
When the postman delivered.
Ernest Tubb co-wrote this song with Red Stewart, based on a real letter that Sergeant Henry Gunter had written to his mother before he was killed in action. The letter said goodbye. It said what soldiers say when they understand they may not come back, that they love her, that they are proud to serve, that she should not grieve too long. Gunter was killed before his mother received it. Someone passed the letter to Tubb. He turned it into a song. The song tells the story of a mother reading that letter, the words still on the page, the man who wrote them already gone. Tubb had been performing on the Grand Ole Opry since 1943 and had built his following on the strength of plain, unvarnished delivery, a voice that did not try to ornament the grief, just carry it. Soldier's Last Letter reached #1 on the country chart and stayed there. Radio stations played it constantly. Soldiers wrote about hearing it in letters home. It was read aloud at memorial services. It was one of the most personal records released during the war, built from the actual last words of a real soldier to his real mother.
You know as you did.
Tubb never recorded anything quite like it again. It stands apart in his catalog as a record made from the rawest possible material. A letter that arrived at the wrong time turned into a song that arrived at exactly the right one. The fact that it reached #1 while the war was still happening, while other mothers were still waiting for letters that had not yet arrived, is the measure of what it meant.
When I was a kid.
Number 1. Rainbow at Midnight, Ernest Tubb, 1946.
After the war was over.
Ernest Tubb recorded Rainbow at Midnight in 1946, a song written by Lost John Miller about a soldier coming home from the war and finding the impossible thing still waiting for him. The rainbow at midnight, which should not exist, which defies all logic of the dark, was the image Miller chose for the feeling of return. After years of soldiers' last letters and blue Christmases and songs about absence and grief, Tubb recorded the answer. The moment the war ended and the man actually came home to find that what he had been holding on to was real. It reached #1 on the Billboard Jukebox Country chart in January 1947 and became the defining homecoming record of the immediate post-war years. The arc of what Tubb had recorded across the war is one of the most remarkable in country music history. His first #1 had been Soldier's Last Letter in 1944, a mother reading the final words of a son already dead. Rainbow at Midnight was the counterweight, arriving from the same voice 2 years later. Death and then life. The letter that came too late, and then the soldier who came home after all. Tubb opened the Ernest Tubb Record Shop on Broadway in Nashville in 1947 and began hosting the Midnight Jamboree radio program that followed the Grand Ole Opry every Saturday night, a place in the dark where country music kept going after the main show ended. The Rainbow at Midnight, the song described, was exactly what he spent the next 2 decades building. It is the right record to end this list, not because the war was over, but because someone came home and found the light still on.